The Home Secretary Amber Rudd announces plans to clamp down on the number of foreign workers and students coming to the UK. She also said the government will make it easier to deport foreign criminals. The government also says it wants to train an extra 1,500 doctors a year in England to reduce the NHS reliance on overseas medics.
We want to see more British doctors in the NHS. The NHS is having to ensure that doctors can come in from overseas in order to ensure there are the numbers of doctors we need. And there are people here in the UK who may want to train as doctors who aren't able to because of the limits that have been on the numbers.
We'll have all the latest from the Conservative Party conference. Also on today's programme. The pound falls to its lowest level against the dollar since 1985 as traders react to speculation about how Britain will leave the EU. People in Haiti prepare for more devastation as Hurricane Matthew arrives with winds of 140 miles an hour. The changing face of eastern India, why the country is now the 5th biggest car manufacturer in the world. And the 1 in a million wedding photograph taken by accident. But who are the happy couple?
Here, groundbreaking treatment, a couple's attempt to conceive despite both being carriers for cystic fibrosis. And there's more Barbadians in Reading than anywhere outside the Caribbean. Their stories are told.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Conservatives are promising a clampdown on immigration. The Home Secretary Amber Rudd has told the party conference that immigration has enhanced life in the UK, but that laws are needed to ensure that migrants aren't taking jobs that British people could do. She's also promised legislation to make it easier to deport foreign nationals who are convicted of certain crimes and stop them returning to this country. Well, let's get the very latest from our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who is at the party conference in Birmingham. Amber Rudd only speaking in the last hour. Norman, tell us more about what she said.
Well, Jane, Amber Rudd and the Prime Minister today both again committed the government to getting net migration down to the tens of thousands, a target they have conspicuously failed to meet so far. But today we got new rules to crack down on legal and illegal immigration ahead of Brexit. Ms Rudd suggesting that in future companies could face new tests when recruiting from abroad to make sure they couldn't first fill those vacancies from British workers. Universities too could face tougher criteria before accepting students from outside the EU, and there's to be a crackdown on EU migrants who commit offences in Britain to lower the legal threshold at which they can be deported and to deport them for longer. At present, they can be barred from Britain for 12 months. Under Ms Rudd's plans, they could be barred for up to 10 years. And there will also be a £140 million fund to help those communities most affected by large-scale immigration. All measures, said Ms Rudd, designed to ease the impact of immigration and to drive down the numbers.
Today I'm setting out how we will get immigration under control. In the long term, by reducing the numbers that come from Europe. In the mid-term, by reforming the student and work route of entry. And in the short term, taking action to help communities affected by high levels of immigration and stopping people coming here that threaten our security.
So, what is going on here? Well, I think two things. First, the government wants to demonstrate that it's not just sitting around waiting for Brexit, twiddling its thumbs before we actually leave the European Union and are no longer bound by freedom of movement rules. But there's a second thing which I think this illustrates, and it is the extent to which all roads lead to Brexit. All different parts of key government policy are now shaped and defined by Brexit. We saw that yesterday with the Chancellor having to ease off on austerity because of the economic implications of Brexit, and we see it today with the Home Secretary bringing forward new migration rules because that was the central issue in the Brexit referendum.
Norman, thank you very much. Norman Smith. Well, also later this afternoon, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, will outline plans to train an extra 1,500 doctors in England every year, so the NHS no longer has to rely on overseas staff. He'll be telling the Conservative Party conference that the health service can be made self-sufficient within a decade. The Doctors' Union, the BMA, has welcomed the announcement, although said it felt like too little too late. Here's our health correspondent, Robert Piggott.
Doctors in England say staff shortages have threatened patient safety and led to low morale in the profession, and that there's a desperate need for greater numbers. Now, says Jeremy Hunt, there will be. He's to expand the training of medical students by a quarter, although this morning he wasn't giving much away.
I'm sorry, I'm not giving any more comments today, thank you.
The government wants the NHS to be less dependent on doctors from other countries.
We want to see more British doctors in the NHS. The NHS is having to ensure that doctors can come in from overseas in order to ensure there are the numbers of doctors we need. And there are people here in the UK who may want to train as doctors who aren't able to because of the limits that have been on the numbers.
There are currently 37,500 doctors from overseas working in the NHS in England, a quarter of the total medical workforce. The training of doctors in English medical schools is currently capped at 6,000 a year, but from 2018 that number will expand by 1,500. The extra doctors will be ready for work in 2024, but there might still be too few. More than 13,000 doctors are expected to retire in the next 5 years, and significant numbers might have left the UK. Brexit and a worldwide shortage of doctors could also make staff harder to find. And the Doctors' Union says the problem goes beyond numbers alone.
The key thing is to recognise that this can't be the complete solution. We've got a demoralised workforce delivering services where demand is increasing enormously, and to be able to address that we need a wider programme than simply announcing an increase in medical school places, welcome though that is. That wider programme would basically involve rebuilding the bridges with the workforce that the government has gone out of its way to destroy over the last few months and years.
The government hopes to recoup some of the extra cost of training by charging overseas students more, but it will also require doctors trained by the NHS to work in the UK for at least 4 years or repay the cost of their training, currently more than £200,000.
For me, that's not an issue. I think the NHS train us all, they give us the resources and the teaching and the setting that we'll be in, so 4 years is not an issue for me.
I think right now it doesn't directly affect me, but I do have many friends who are definitely very interested in moving to places like Australia and Canada straight after their foundation years.
Senior doctors say the increase in training places will help create a more sustainable NHS workforce.
It's something that we've been calling for some time now because of the increasing problems with gaps in rotas for the workforce, which we feel has contributed very negatively to the morale of junior doctors. So overall, we welcome the potential announcement.
From 2018, thousands more doctors will be starting work on the wards. But by European standards, the UK has relatively few doctors per capita, and it has a long way to go to catch up. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to our health editor, Hugh Pym, who's at St George's, University of London Medical School in South London. What are those you've been able to speak to there, Hugh, thinking about this idea this afternoon?
Well, Jane, here at this specialist healthcare university, which takes hundreds of new medical students every academic year, they have welcomed this new policy. Students are saying it was very competitive for them to get in. They know a lot of friends who got good grades would have made good doctors but didn't get in because there are far more applicants for places than there are currently places. So expanding the number of places has got to be positive, and the principal told me she thought it was a very welcome move, and here they could create enough places to meet the numbers that have been set by the government, and that's just been more broadly echoed across other institutions as well. But one or two questions being asked: why is it taking so long? If this had been set in train, say 5 years ago, you'd have soon seen the new doctors coming through from the new places, and given the difficulties of recruitment right now, as we heard there in Robert's piece, there there is an immediate problem which will not be dealt with by this new policy. Questions are also being asked about whether it's a good thing to charge foreign students coming to England for the government side of the costs of their training, and also is it a good thing to have this hold on students for 4 years after they've qualified? Is that the right signal to be sending out just at a time when you want to recruit a lot more doctors for the NHS?
Hugh, thank you. Hugh Pym. The Defence Secretary Michael Fallon has promised more legal protection for British troops. He said the UK will opt out of parts of the European Convention on Human Rights to end what he called an industry of vexatious claims against British troops. Let's talk to our legal affairs correspondent, Clive Coleman. So, talking about opting out of the European Convention on Human Rights, Clive, I mean, which parts of it? How would this all work?
Not all of it. I think what we're looking at here is the right to life and the right to liberty under the European Convention, which, let's remind ourselves again, Jane, is nothing to do with the EU. This is an international human rights treaty that we are signed up to. And what they're talking about is what's known as a derogation. It's a temporary suspension of those rights. You can only do it in times of war or in times of extreme emergency in the life of the nation. Interestingly, by the way, you can't derogate from the right which protects you from torture. You can't touch that at all. It's only going to apply to future conflicts. Now, in the future, it is possible, if it's brought in, it will be subject to a legal challenge. So you could, for instance, have our courts saying, well, look, you know, you can't do this because this isn't a proper war, or this is a disproportionate response to an emergency. So you could have a standoff between the courts and the government on that. But the hope is this, that it will choke off spurious claims brought against our armed forces that use this human rights route. So we're looking at cases, for instance, where foreign nationals die in the custody of British service personnel. People remember the case of Baha Musa, who died with 93 separate injuries in 2003 in Iraq. That was not a spurious case. But that scenario where someone is in custody of British forces, cases of enemy commanders who have been unlawfully detained by British troops, or cases of those shot and killed while not in detention. So a broad range. We do know that the Iraq Historic Allegations Team has considered something like 1,500 cases, of which 280 are said to be cases where there are allegations of unlawful killing. So these cases do arise in numbers during, when we're involved in conflicts. One final point I think is interesting, which is this, that if this was to come in, then there are some who are worried that this sends out a worrying signal that the UK is derogating from the European Convention, and that some countries who don't have a very good record on human rights will look at the UK example and say, well, this perhaps gives us more freedom to abuse human rights.
Clive, thanks very much. Clive Coleman. Hurricane Matthew, one of the most powerful storms to hit the Caribbean in recent years, is sweeping over Haiti with wind speeds of more than 140 miles an hour. The country's president says the storm has already killed a number of people, and he's called on residents to leave their homes and seek shelter, as Christian Fraser reports.
Hurricane Matthew is the most powerful storm to cross the Caribbean in almost 10 years. And right about now, it's barrelling across an island that is ill-prepared for what it will throw at them. Haiti is still recovering from the earthquake that struck in 2010 and a devastating outbreak of cholera. There are thousands of people living under corrugated iron roofs in shanty towns that are no defence from sustained 140-mile-an-hour winds. The president has been urging people to move to safer shelter.
We've already seen deaths, people who are out at sea. There are people who are missing. There are people who didn't respect the alerts. They've lost their lives.
The Red Cross has been out in those areas that will take the brunt, in districts where roads are already filled with mud. But many, like this man, have refused the offer of shelter. They came with a truck to move, as he said, but what about the stuff we have at home? If we lose our things, if they're stolen, we won't get them back. From the International Space Station, Matthew looks like a vortex of trouble. The forecasters predict it could dump up to 40 inches of rain in the more isolated areas of Haiti, raising fears of mudslides and floods on these heavily populated hillsides. Further north, in Cuba, the government has already declared an alert in 6 eastern provinces.
Hurricane Matthew has slammed into Haiti, a very powerful storm. It's been getting all of its energy from the ocean waters. And over the next 24 hours, it'll move across Cuba and then exit out into the Bahamas, where again, there's lots of very warm ocean tropical waters. That's going to fuel the hurricane, so it'll maintain some of its intensity and then potentially moving very close to the Florida coastline as we go through this week.
In Jamaica, the rain and lightning from the outer bands of Matthew have passed the capital, Kingston, leaving plenty of damage behind. But this might be nothing compared with what awaits the impoverished islanders of Haiti. Christian Fraser, BBC News.
The pound has hit a 31-year low against the dollar as markets react to new details about how Britain will leave the European Union. Sterling has also dropped to a 3-year low against the euro. But the weak pound has pushed share prices to record highs. Let's find out more from our economics correspondent, Andy Verity. Sterling falling, so why are shares doing what they're doing?
Yeah, it's not what you would initially think, is it? But there's a very good reason, actually. We're talking mostly multinational companies when you look at the FTSE 100. Those biggest companies listed for trading of their shares on the London stock market are multinational companies. They earn most of their money in dollars or euros. So when you convert them back into pounds, it looks like more pounds that they're earning. So the share price goes up. That's one reason that's happening. The other reason is that they're taking a view that the weak pound may be helping to some extent. Certainly with the export sector, we've seen all kinds of evidence now that the weak pound is making manufacturers more competitive. People buying their goods from Asia or even from Europe, they're ordering more of them because they can get them for the same price. They can get more goods. So the weak pound may be helping in that direction.
Andy, thank you. Andy Verity, our economics correspondent. The time now is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The government is promising measures to reduce immigration and help ease the pressure on public services. And coming up, getting their particles in a row, 3 British physicists have won this year's Nobel Prize for Physics.
In South today at 1:30, groundbreaking treatment. A couple's attempt to conceive despite both being carriers for cystic fibrosis. And there are more Barbadians in Reading than anywhere outside the Caribbean. A new exhibition celebrates their history.
India is now the 5th biggest car maker in the world. It has just overtaken South Korea, producing more than 2.5 million vehicles in the last year, with many of the world's leading brands now choosing India as a base. Good for the country's economy and good for thousands of people for whom a job in their local car factory is changing their lives. From Chennai in eastern India, Yogita Lamaya sent us this report.
Sujita Rajendra Babu lives with her mother in a small town near Chennai. She grew up in a village and her father was a farmer. After he died, it was up to her to put food on the table. By night, she helps out in the kitchen. But by day, she's a technician at a car factory. She leads a small team here and can't imagine a life without this job.
I would have had to work on a farm and we would have had just enough money for our day-to-day lives. Before I started this job, because we were poor, no one gave us any respect. Now, people say she's working in a big company and making money. In fact, a lot of people ask me for jobs for their children too.
Thousands of people are employed at this plant. Each salary earned helps keep a home running. Hundreds of cars are made here every day. They're sold across India and nearly half of them are exported. This car is being loaded onto a lorry from where it'll be taken to the Chennai port nearby on India's eastern coast to be sold overseas. Cars that are made here are sent to more than 100 countries and the West is a big market. So a lot of the jobs at the factory depend on exports. Like this car maker, several other foreign brands have set up shop in Chennai. There are challenges, inadequate infrastructure and India's famed bureaucracy. But there are big advantages too.
India is a cost competitive country. That means labour is relatively cheap compared to other countries, and it also means that we can get parts relatively cheap. So in other words, we can make cars here, the total delivered cost of the vehicles more competitively than perhaps Western Europe or North America or Japan.
If more factories open in India and it sells more to the world, the faster its economy will grow. For many of these workers, it could be a chance to grow too, from being the makers of cars to perhaps someday becoming buyers. Yogita Lamai, BBC News, Chennai.
The man accused of murdering the Labour MP Jo Cox in June has appeared in court. Thomas Mayer gave no response when asked how he pleaded to the charge. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sandford is at the Old Bailey. What happened in court, Daniel?
Yes, Jane, a very, very unusual moment in court today as Thomas Mayer was asked to plead for the first time to the charges that he faces. He is accused of murdering Jo Cox MP on the 16th of June, of possessing a firearm with intent, of grievous bodily harm against Bernard Carter Kenny, and possession of a weapon, essentially a dagger. He was asked what he pleaded to each of the charges in turn, and each time he simply remained silent. The court checked that he could hear what the clerk was saying. He said that he could, but still he remained silent as each of the charges was put to him. So the judge, Mr. Justice Wilkie, ordered that pleas of not guilty should be entered against each of the charges he faces, and the case, which is being heard as part of the terrorism list here at the Old Bailey, will now go to trial beginning on the 14th of November.
Daniel, thank you. Daniel Sandford. Mike Pence and Tim Kaine may not be household names, but tonight millions of Americans will watch them as they go head-to-head in the US vice presidential debate. The face-off between the Republican, Pence, and the Democrat, Kaine, may not have much impact on the result of November's election. But as our Washington correspondent Laura Bicker reports, the debate could make for memorable political theatre.
When it comes to the debates between those who would be second in command, perhaps James Stockdale put it best in 1992.
Who am I? Why am I here?
So let's start with Hillary Clinton's pick, Tim Kaine. Even Republicans have struggled to find fault with the Virginia senator. His first speech as the Democratic vice presidential candidate was aimed at Donald Trump. No doubt skills he will have been sharpening for the big night.
We've seen again and again that when Donald Trump says he has your back, you better watch out.
Donald Trump chose Indiana Governor Mike Pence, although their initial bonding was hit and miss. He's an experienced Washington hand and a favourite of social conservatives. And as the politician in this relationship, he often finds himself translating the views of businessman Trump.
It seems like just about every day the national media latches on some issue about my running mate, right? You turn on your Twitter account, turn on your cable TV, it's something else.
The vice presidential debates can often draw huge audiences.
Hey, can I call you Joe?
This 2008 contest between Joe Biden and Sarah Palin was the most watched. 70 million viewers tuned in, and this year's vice presidential debate might really matter.
We've got two presidential candidates who are seen deeply unfavorably by the vast majority of Americans, and two vice presidential candidates who are largely unknown by the vast majority of Americans. But those vice presidential candidates have a level of credibility talking about their presidential running mates that the presidential candidates can't really have talking about themselves.
Candidates do get a chance to distinguish themselves. In 1988, Dan Quayle compared himself to President Kennedy. His opponent, Lloyd Benson, had this scathing reply.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
There's been nothing conventional about the 2016 election year, apart from perhaps the two vice presidential picks. Safe choices, safe hands. And yet, as the past has shown us, when they take to the stage, who knows what could happen? Laura Bicker, BBC News, Washington.
Three British-born scientists have won the Nobel Prize for Physics. David Thewlis, Duncan Haldane and Michael Kosterlitz worked in the 1970s and 1980s on how matter behaves at extremely low temperatures. It's thought their work could be used in making a new generation of computers and electrical conductors. Let's find out more from our science correspondent, Pallab Ghosh. Tell us a little bit more about their work, Pallab.
Well, Jane, before their work, what a fantastic story. Not just one British winner of a Nobel Prize, but three. And we seem to be doing this year after year, just showing how great the UK is at science. But as to their work, what they did was they studied how materials behave at either very low temperatures or when they're very, very flat. Now, at these states, they behave in weird and wonderful ways. So a wire can transmit electricity forever with no electrical resistance whatsoever. Super cold liquids can be put into jars and creep out as if they have a life of their own, which is fun, but also potentially useful because these guys have worked out the mathematics as to how these things happen. And it's led to a whole new field of research to try and harness their observations to build a new generation of electronics, to build mobile phone chips that are of the future. But the Nobel Prize Committee didn't give it for the usefulness of their work, nothing so grubby. They gave it because they were amazed at the beauty of the mathematics, they said, and the incredible insights these men had into the nature of matter at the very deepest level. So wonderful, it's a wonderful story and wonderful science.
Yes, lovely to have good news. Thank you very much, Pallab Ghosh. Thank you. More than 50,000 people in the UK undergo cosmetic surgery every year. They may think they're being operated on by a qualified surgeon, but actually the law allows any doctor to perform cosmetic surgery without extra training or qualifications. Now the Royal College of Surgeons has launched a new website containing advice about how to avoid rogue companies offering possibly dangerous deals. Tim Muffet reports.
I had hooded upper eyelids. The skin folds came down onto my eyelash line.
Dawn believed her eyelids ruined her appearance and were affecting her quality of life. But the cosmetic surgery designed to correct them has had a far more devastating impact.
I've had too much skin removed from my lower eyelids, which means that my upper eyelids have nothing to meet. I'm now left with a condition called lagoplanthos, which is the inability to close your eyes when you sleep. My life is basically ruled by an alarm on my phone that goes off every 2 hours, put eye drops in, tape my left eye closed when I go to bed, put an eye gel in, and that is how I live my life.
Dawn says there was little information available about the surgeon who carried out the procedure.
This is me asleep.
The risks, she says, weren't fully explained.
I'm as angry today as I was 4 years ago. I have counselling, I have anxiety. If it goes wrong, you better make sure that you get better because you've got one hell of a fight on your hands.
More than 50,000 cosmetic surgery procedures were carried out in England alone last year. That's a rise of around 13% on the year before. But many say it is very hard to get an impartial view on the skills and experience of a particular surgeon, as well as the potential risks involved. So the Royal College of Surgeons has today launched this website. It's aimed at giving those considering cosmetic surgery impartial advice.
Some of the people who are carrying out the surgery are not really particularly well qualified. At the moment, any doctor, as long as they're qualified as a doctor, can actually perform cosmetic surgery. We think it's important that we identify for patients the correct information and the risks of the procedures, and also identify for them certified surgeons.
The site doesn't cover less invasive Botox or dermal filler injections, but it has been welcomed by the British Association of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons.
This information can make a huge difference in the decisions patients are making.
It's hoped that those considering it will now have a clearer view of the full implications. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
Now, this is a 1 in a million snapshot. The moment that a filmmaker was flying a drone over the high-rise buildings of Hong Kong when he chanced upon a newlywed couple on a roof lying down in a star pose for their wedding photos. The image has now gone viral and the hunt is on to try to find out who the newlyweds are. Amy Cole reports.
The hard grey skyline of Hong Kong captured by a drone, and then, like a glistening jewel, this. Blink and you'll miss it. A seemingly newlywed couple taking time out. The filmmaker had already made this short film on a previous visit to Hong Kong and had returned to do a follow-up.
I was actually intending mostly to shoot the sunset with the drone. I was just pointing the drone out toward the horizon. There's beautiful mountains. The drone's battery was going dead. I just pointed the camera of the drone straight down to capture, you know, whatever was happening below as the drone returned home automatically.
It was a moment of serendipity for Brandon Lee, who travels the world making short films. This still from the footage, which Lee admits to slightly editing to highlight the newlyweds, has gone viral, and now he's trying to track down the couple.
I've identified the building, and I've called the management of the building, or I called the front desk at least. I sent them an email. I honestly haven't had time to go down there myself and try to make a plea. I have wild fan theories, like maybe it's a couple of mannequins.
An interesting theory, but whether the couple is plastic or real, the image is striking and is certainly creating a buzz. Amy Cole, BBC News.
Let's catch up with the weather prospects. Matt Taylor is here. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Jane. Lovely autumn day out there once again. As our weather watch has certainly been showing, a little bit more cloud out there than we saw through yesterday. Most dry once again, but believe it or not, rain is a little closer to us than you might imagine. Let me show you what's going on at the moment. We've got high pressure across Scandinavia, low pressure there to North Atlantic. They're almost fighting it out at the moment. Winds coming around from one direction, the high, the low, the other one, and they're meeting just to the west of the UK, keeping this cloud in place. It's been a weather front, and it's been raining relentlessly across the west coast of Ireland. Around a month's worth of rain has fallen in Valentia, flooding across County Kerry. That's just in the space of a day and a half. Compared to the UK, where our wettest spot hasn't even managed 1 millimetre of rain. And the dry story continues. High pressure is actually going to continue to dominate through this week. The winds coming in from an east to southeasterly direction, picking up a little bit compared with yesterday. The cloud, though, reasonably well broken. Some good sunny spells out there, and actually quite pleasant in that sunshine too. Warm enough at this time of year with temperatures around 17, 18, maybe 19 Celsius in one or two spots. A little bit breezier across the southwest of England. Here tonight, there's an area of low pressure developing just to the southwest of you, and that may just throw one or two showers your way. Cornwall, Isles of Scilly in particular. Most of those stay dry. Increased amounts of cloud to take us into tomorrow morning. Increased breeze, so temperatures by night not dropping as much. The mornings maybe not quite as chilly, but you have to factor in that wind won't make it feel particularly special. So for tomorrow, a bit more cloud to start the day. The wind that little bit stronger, especially so across the southwest. Quite strong and gusty here. Small chance of a shower. Vast majority of the UK dry. Sunny spells into the afternoon. The sunniest conditions, East Anglia and the southeast as we finish the day. But note the temperatures down a good 2-3 degrees compared to today. Maybe a little bit more down those eastern coasts. So why is it getting a bit windier? Well, it's that low pressure to the southwest of us. Think of the low pressure at the base of a roller coaster, high pressure at the top. The closer there to, the quicker the carriage rolls down the hill, and hence, for us, the stronger the winds are. So the winds will strengthen again further through Wednesday night into Thursday, and by this stage we're starting to drag in slightly colder air again from the near continent. So Thursday probably even cooler than Wednesday, especially so across England and Wales. Varying amounts of clouds, some sunshine coming through. Weather-wise, though, it really is a case of spot the difference. Most will be staying dry, and it's just moving that cloud around. The biggest change, I think most of you will notice, is the feel of things. So the emphasis for the rest of this week, staying dry across most parts of the UK, maybe 1 or 2 showers towards the weekend, increasingly breezy and turning colder. Details for the weather for the weekend is available on the website, and if you have friends or family in the Caribbean at the moment, we've got information on Hurricane Matthew and also under the reasons how hurricanes form there for you. Jane.
Matt, thanks very much. Thank you. And just a reminder of our top story here this lunchtime. The government is promising measures to reduce immigration and to help ease the pressure on public services. That is all from us for this lunchtime. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.